The government says the Voice Referendum was designed to help improve the lives of First Nations Australians, but for some, the jury is still out. Hi, I'm Carly Williams. I'm a Quandamooka woman and I'm the ABC's National Indigenous correspondent. I'm joining you from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation.
And I'm Fran Kelly, here too on Gadigal land in Sydney, and this is the Voice Referendum Explained.
And if you don't know how it's going to work, how can you support it?
A yes vote is a vote to give respect to Indigenous Australians.
It's the wrong path, it's the wrong proposition, it's the wrong model.
We've heard a lot of opinions about the Voice to Parliament, and some go back to 2017 when many of us first heard about the Indigenous Voice to Parliament. We're going to go back to that time.
So there has to be some really fundamental change in the relationship. Australia has to hear us, for goodness sake. How many times do we have to tell you?
We're past the point where symbolism is going to cut it these days. We need our people to be empowered.
It's about saying we were here, let's recognise that fact, but also let's come together as Australians to really, be united.
On the 26th of May in 2017, 250 Indigenous leaders gathered at Uluru. For the next 4 days, in the shadow of the rock, they debated at that constitutional convention what form recognition of First Nations people should take in our constitution. And the answer they came up with is the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country, and we invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future.
That's the first time we heard that, Carly. That's Megan Davis. She's a cobble woman. She's also a professor specialising in constitutional and human rights law, and she was the very first person to read out loud the Uluru Statement from the Heart at the Rock in 2017.
So the one-pager that is the Uluru Statement from the Heart is a logic for the Australian people as to why we seek constitutional recognition. What we wanted was a referendum and for the Australian people to support us in that. And so that is what the Uluru Statement from the Heart is. It contains the call for a constitutionally enshrined voice to the Parliament, and it asks Australians to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future.
So that's what it is, Carly, but where did it come from?
Calls for Indigenous recognition in the Constitution have gone back 100 years. We spoke about this in episode 1, the bark petitions. There's a lot of blood, sweat and tears and advocacy that have got us to this point, Fran. But the steps that got us to the Uluru Statement. There was this thing called the Referendum Council. Its job was to figure out how to best recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia's Constitution. The council set up 12 dialogue meetings across 2016 and 2017. Delegates were invited. They were all across the country, and there was about 100 on average First Nations people at each of these 12 meetings.
That's quite a lot of people.
It's quite a lot of people because when you consider the population of First Nations people in this country, we weren't all in the room in those dialogues, but we're a small part of the population, but it was still a lot of us there. So it's what advocates call a significant consultation process.
So they had all those meetings, and then what happened?
After the meetings, it all came together at Uluru in 2017, where delegates put forward the Uluru Statement from the Heart. It was a sequence of reforms: voice, treaty, truth, in that order.
And there was also a word used in there that I'd never heard before. It was a word Makarrata. What does that mean?
It's a Yolngu word meaning the coming together after a conflict. And Uluru Statement advocates use that to describe the process to get to treaty. But Fran, this is back all happening in 2017. What I'm wondering is, why has it taken this long to get to the referendum that they asked for back then?
Yeah, good question. Well, Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister at the time in 2017, and when he was handed the Uluru Statement from the Heart by those dialogues, by that constitutional convention, his first reactions were really pretty negative. He described it as a third chamber of the Parliament, and he said right off the bat, the Australian people would never have a bar of it.
I don't think it's a good idea, and if it were put up in a referendum, it would go down in flames. I do not believe what would in effect be a third chamber of Parliament available only to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is consistent with our constitutional values.
So a pretty flat-out rejection from Malcolm Turnbull right from the top. And those who'd been, worked on the Uluru Statement, they were just gutted. The Prime Minister labelling the Voice a third chamber of the Parliament, it was not only misleading, it was also politically devastating because it was a description that stuck. It had struck a chord and it had stoked fear. And really, those people have been working on this process ever since, have been trying to build the momentum back to get it back from that moment.
Yeah, but Malcolm Turnbull's changed his tune on this recently, hasn't he?
He has. He now says that he regrets calling it a third chamber. He still says he has misgivings about the Voice, but he will vote yes on referendum day because it remains the only form of constitutional recognition that Aboriginal people are asking for. But Carly, Malcolm Turnbull and his government, they're not the only ones who were not happy with the Voice, were they?
From the early stages, there was disagreement amongst Indigenous Australians for different reasons. Fred Hooper, he is a Murrawari man. He was at the Uluru Convention in 2017, but he walked out in protest.
Well, look, we support the Uluru Statement. Don't get me wrong. The Murrawari Nation supports the Uluru Statement. We don't support the processes that they're going through at the moment. We believe truth-telling should be told first, then an agreement-making, then a voice if our Aboriginal people want it.
So Fran is part of what's being called the progressive black no camp. He's voting no because he doesn't think a voice is fit for purpose.
I'm feeling confused at the moment as an Aboriginal man because I'm struggling to find some clarity in how the voice is really going to do the things that's been lacking by government for the last 200 years.
And Fred also thinks the voice shouldn't be a focus right now. Fred Hooper wants truth-telling first. And for Fred, truth-telling looks like an apology, but straight from the top.
It needs to be King Charles, who's the head of the institution, standing on country in Australia, delivering an apology in the same manner that his mother, the late, Queen Elizabeth, where she went to New Zealand or Aotearoa, she stood on their country, she dressed in their cloak, she delivered the apology in person on their land. That's the type of apology that we need.
Wow, Fred's aiming high. He wants the king. And he's not the only one. Actually, Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe, who's associated now with something called the Black Sovereign Movement, she has come out recently and said she too wants King Charles to pay a visit. She wants him at the table talking treaty, though Lydia Thorpe now actually wants the whole referendum process scrapped.
The Voice is the window dressing for constitutional recognition. We are merrily pointing out that there is no progress, that there is false hope, and that we deserve better.
So in fact, Lydia Thorpe is saying, let's go back to the drawing board, but both she and Fred Hooper certainly think that the voice shouldn't come first. It should be truth and treaty first. But Megan Davis, who was there at Uluru too, remember, she says the overwhelming opinion in the room at Uluru was that the first priority should be enshrining the voice in the Constitution.
The process is not contested by the 200 people that stood in the room, the consensus. It's contested by the 7 people that walked out. But the way that news works is that negative news sells better than positive news. So nobody ever talks to the 200 people that stayed. They only talk to the 7 that walked. But it was a historic consensus. We all agreed to the Uluru Statement from the heart and the voice to Parliament as the primary reform. And that is an important point for Australian history.
So we've got contested history here, Carly.
Exactly. And now on the no side, we've got 2 very different camps. The progressive black no, represented by people like Lydia Thorpe and Fred Hooper, who say the voice doesn't do enough. And then there's the conservative no, Peter Dutton, Jacinta Nampijinpa Price, who say the voice is too legally risky, it's too radical, and there's too many unknowns. And there's not too many things that these 2 no camps agree on. It's not like they're out campaigning together or anything like that.
That would be awkward.
It would be. But what they both say, what they both question is, did the Uluru Statement and the Uluru Dialogues speak for all mob.
Yeah, and we're hearing a lot of this about this description of elitism, that these people in the no side are saying that it was the elites who came up with the idea of the voice, that it was the elites who were driving the whole Constitutional Convention in the first place. Megan Davis says that's just plain wrong.
We didn't want politicians, and we didn't want CEOs of community-controlled health organisations. What many grassroots communities would call the black elite were not invited to participate in the Uluru dialogues because they have a say. They just have to pick up the phone and the media reports everything that they say. This process was for those people who never get to have a say. They were people from community with, low satisfaction jobs, low income jobs. We had to move it to the weekends because they're not bureaucrats or politicians or academics that can do stuff during the work. There were people with real jobs who had to do it on the weekend. Elites is just a very easy and simple tagline to throw around to diminish people, but that word does not describe the people who participated in the Uluru dialogues.
You can hear Megan Davis's frustration there, always having to fend off these allegations of it being elitist or it being too risky. She and others just want to get talking about what they see as the positives for the Voice.
Well, next week we're going to take a look at some of the community issues that the Voice could address and how it could work, because people are still trying to understand how the Voice could tackle those areas of entrenched disadvantage.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think people want examples of what it's going to do, because that's the whole pitch for the Voice, isn't it? That it's going to improve Indigenous lives. Thanks for listening. While you're here, why don't you subscribe so you never miss an episode? You can find us in the ABC Listen app. Just search for the podcast, The Voice Referendum Explained.
And you can watch us on iView. See you, Fran.
See you, Carly.